Section 2, the birth of political parties. Background knowledge. The arguments over Hamilton's financial plan reflected serious disagreements among the new nation's leaders. In this section, we will learn how those differences led to the formation of political parties in the United States. Political parties emerged. The framers of the Constitution did not expect political parties to develop in the United States. Rather, they thought that the government leaders would rise above personal or local interests. The leaders, they believed, would work together for the sake of the country. In those days, people spoke of factions rather than political party. A faction was an organized political group, and the word was not complimentary. James Madison considered factions to be selfish groups, unconcerned with the well being of the whole nation. Madison argued in the Federalist Papers that an effective national government would prevent the growth of factions, as he put it. Among the numerous advantages promised by a well constructed union, none deserves to be more accurately developed than its tendency to break and control the violence of a faction. Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, who were rarely in agreement, both disliked factions. Hamilton warned that the spirit of faction might work like a spark to bring mob rule and chaos. No one was more hostile to factions than George Washington. The president watched unhappily as Jefferson and Hamilton, the leading members of his cabinet, grew apart. Washington tried to reduce the quarreling. In a letter to Henry Lee, he predicted the factions would destroy the best fabric of human government and happiness. Despite Washington's efforts, by the early 1790s, two political parties were beginning to form. One group supported Thomas Jefferson and his close ally, James Madison, and the other supported Alexander Hamilton and his ideas. Republicans against Federalists. The two parties that took shape during the first half of the 1790s eventually got the names Republicans and Federalists. The Republicans took their name from political clubs called Democratic Republican societies that had been organized in various parts of the country. They argued that the federal government was growing too strong under President Washington. They wanted to keep most of the power at a state or local level. They feared that a strong government would likely act like a monarch. Republicans, they were led by Thomas Jefferson. They believed people should have political power. They favored strong state government. They emphasized agriculture, favored strict interpretation of the Constitution. They were pro French. They opposed the National Bank and they opposed protective tariffs. The Federalists were led by Alexander Hamilton. They believed wealthy and educated people should lead. They favored a strong government, emphasized manufacturing, shipping, and trade. They favored loose interpretation of the Constitution. They were pro British. They favored the National Bank and favored protective tariffs. This early Republican Party drew its main strength from Southern planters and Northern farmers and artisans. Key leaders were James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. Unhappy with the federal government's policies, Jefferson resigned as Secretary of the State in 1793. The Federalists took their name from the people who had supported the adoption of the Constitution after 1787. A prominent leader was Alexander Hamilton. As in the debates over the Constitution, Federalists said the United States needed a strong federal government to hold the country together and deal with its problems. Federalists drew support mainly from merchants, other property owners, and ordinary workers whose jobs depended on manufacturing and trade. They were especially strong in the North. Organizing and arguing. At the time that both parties were organizing, the Federalists had an advantage. President Washington usually supported Hamilton and his policies. One Hamilton supporter running for office proudly said, "I am a Federalist, the friend of order, of government, and the present administration." A newspaper editor who supported the Republicans saw the situation very differently. In 1792, he printed a series of questions in the National Gazette, implying that the Federalists wanted to betray the Constitution and bring back a king. Are not some amongst us advocates for monarchy and aristocracy? He asked. Are not the principles of all such people hostile to the principles of the Constitution? Other disagreements. In addition to the fundamental disagreement about the power of the federal government, Federalists and Republicans disagreed about other issues. Federalists favored the national bank and a national tariff. The Republicans opposed both. Federalists favored close ties with England. Republicans were sympathetic to France, where a revolution overthrew the king in 1789. The election of 1796. In 1796, George Washington said he would not seek a third term. This set an important precedent. Not until Franklin Roosevelt ran and won a third term in 1940 would any president seek more than 2 terms. The Republican candidate for president in 1796 was Thomas Jefferson. The Federalists nominated John Adams, a New Englander who had been Washington's vice president. In 1796, president and vice president were not elected together as a ticket, as they are today. Instead, the candidate getting the most votes became president, and the second place candidate became vice president. Adams finished first, and Jefferson second. The country thus gained a Federalist president and a Republican vice president. Not surprisingly, this led to serious tensions during the next 4 years. Looking back and ahead, the Republicans and Federalists had conflicting visions of what the federal government should do. In the next section, we will read about President Washington dealt with challenges at home and abroad. This is talking about political parties then and now. So 1850s to now. Today's two-party American political system differs from the party system described in the chapter. By the 1850s, both modern parties had been formed. The Democratic Party traces its roots to the Republican Party of Thomas Jefferson. And today's Republican Party, which was born during the 1850s over the issue of slavery, has no connection to Jefferson's Republicans. This shows the donkey is the modern day symbol associated with the Democratic Party, and then the Republican Party is the elephant.